I am live. I am continuing to read Many Lifetimes. I'm in chapter 9, An Assortment of Apparitions. This is by Joan Marshall Grants. This is a collaboration between her and Dennis Kelsey. Joan and they were both therapists in different ways. This is about hypnosis, and Joan's knowing about reincarnation and far memory and so on. And her husband was first of all a little skeptical, but evidence has shown that she very well had far memory and so on. Anyway, she was describing a case here where it was apparent when she was much younger, because she had seen somebody who was Uncle Arthur, Mrs. Beatty, that was her mother-in-law, and Uncle Arthur had been dead for 20 years, but she had seen him. So I continue in this chapter. Shortly before the flying bombs started falling on London, Charles and I spent a week's holiday at the Savoy Hotel. On our first evening we decided to dine in the grill room. It was crowded, but we had booked a table which was so placed that the back of my chair was against one of the square pillars. "Charles," I exclaimed, "find another table, quick. I'm sitting on somebody's lap." "Can you pretend he isn't there?" he said, waving a waiter away. "There is no other table free, and dozens of people are waiting to eat." "No, I can't, and I'll have to do something about it." "Oh, why does he have to pick on me, when hundreds of people must have sat on his lap before?" "Why, lots of people," asked Charles. "Suppose he is someone who was here yesterday and got killed in last night's air raid. Wouldn't it be natural for him to dash back to the last safe and gay place he was in? By the way, is it a he or a she?" "He, and he's been here a long time, 20 or 30 years perhaps. He's sitting here alone. Alone is the key. He may have had hundreds of acquaintances, but he had forgotten his real friends." The waiter came back. We ordered something that would take time to prepare and to give me a chance to help the ghost. It is difficult to free a ghost and remain inconspicuous in a crowded restaurant, but it worked. As water flowing down a dry ditch gradually clears it of accumulated rubbish, so did the affection I freely offered to the ghost sweep away his loneliness, until he was free to remember the people he had loved. The table where he sat alone gradually became larger. As first one friend he had forgotten, and then another came back to him on the current of affection. When there were 6 people, they went away together, and I, no longer sitting on a sad stranger's lap, was free to enjoy my dinner. As I got up to leave the table, I noticed a small brass plaque on the pillar behind my chair. It read, "This table was regularly used by Charles Foreman for many years up to 1915. When I related this story in a newspaper article many years later, the editor illustrated it with a photograph of the plaque and added the footnote, "Charles Foreman was an American theater impresario. He was drowned in the sinking of the Lusitania." In January 1956, Charles and I went to spend a weekend with friends near Dublin. On the Sunday morning, our host, whom I will call Patrick, took us for a long muddy walk, and on the way home announced that we were dropping in for a drink with a neighbour. There was a large Georgian house, and as it's customary in Ireland, Patrick strode into it without ringing the bell. There was no one about, and he led us into a drawing room on the left of the front door. "Do you find this room a bit chilly?" he inquired. And I, who had just caught sight of myself in a mirror and realized that having neither comb nor compact, I could do nothing to make myself even slightly more presentable, said rather crossly, "Of course it's chilly. What else would I expect of an Irish house in midwinter?" "Feel one of the radiators," he suggested. I did so, and flinched because it was almost too hot to touch. 3 large, hot radiators and a blazing fire, and you still think the room is cold? It is the coldest room I've ever been in, said Charles. I was relieved to hear him say so, for I felt as though a jug of ice water was being poured down my back, and hoped it was not an early symptom of flu. Then, as I moved closer to the fire, I saw an open coffin. I stared at it in horror and then turned to Patrick. Taking me to a wake, without even warning me, may be your idea of an Irish joke, but I find it excruciatingly unfunny. Wake? What on earth are you talking about? Isn't wake the word for the Irish custom of asking the neighbours in for a farewell drink beside the corpse? Take another look, said Charles mildly. With an effort I made myself turn around. Where the coffin had been, I now saw a chintz-covered sofa. So it was only a spook, I said. Sorry, I got muddled. A very solid spook, said Charles consolingly. I spotted there was one here as soon as we came into the room. You had better take another look at it and find out what needs doing. I did so, seeing not with my eyes but through my forehead. This may sound odd, but it is the simplest way of describing the sensations. The man I had first seen as a corpse was now standing in the corner of the room, staring at his body, which was lying in its coffin. I described him to the others. The code in this room is the code of death. He did not believe in any form of immortality. That is why he is still here. Why didn't someone come to explain to him that he was dead, said Patrick. It seemed a bit rough on the poor chap. They tried, but he wouldn't listen. He didn't love anyone, not even himself. That's why he is alone. If he had loved anyone, even for a brief period, the love would have been a lifeline, which would have saved him from this icy backwater. Or if only people would realize how dangerous it is not to love. Tune out, quick, said Charles, who had heard someone coming down the staircase. I switched off the other wavelength with a jerk and said, Patrick, don't tell them what I've seen. They'll think I'm dotty. But he had already left the room, and I could hear him in the hall saying gaily, Peggy, darling, Joan has found a coffin, tenanted in the drawing room. I felt embarrassed, in case she was one of the people who are offended at being told their house is haunted, as though one had complained that the drains were faulty. But Peggy took his remark as perfectly natural. My dear, I implored Patrick to bring you here in the hope that you would see it. By this time we were both sitting on the sofa, which seemed rather macabre. Did you see anything else? She inquired eagerly. The person is in the corner over there, I said. Of course he is. What a comfort that you can see him too. My husband, luckily he is away for the weekend, does not believe in ghosts, and so it is unrestful having to remember not to mention them. It is a nuisance having a ghost in here, because it seems to make the room so icy that we hardly ever use it, even in midsummer. I want to help him, but I'm not sure how to set about it. Could you give me a clue? You must find out what he loves. Wait a minute. There is someone else here. It's a dog. A brown and white spaniel. His dog. The dog died before he did, and when he thought he had lost it, he became even more defensive against love. But the spaniel had more faith than her master. You must make him notice that she has stayed with him. Seeing her will make his heart begin to thaw. I knew about the dog too, said Peggy. Our dogs were terrified of the ghost in my home in Tipperary, and used to run yelping if we tried to take them into the haunted room. But my Labrador stands in that corner wagging his tail as though asking the ghost to take him for a walk. I suppose he's trying to help the spaniel make her master notice them. Now that you have given me this self-confidence, I need it. It is extraordinary how helpful it is to meet a brother brush. I shall come here with my dog tonight, after everyone else has gone to bed, so that I shan't be interrupted. Instead of just praying for him, as I have done often before, and so has the priest for that matter, I shall remind him of the fidelity of his spaniel. I shall talk to him gently and with love until he feels that he isn't alone anymore. A few days later she telephoned to me. He is still with us, she said, but the coffin disappeared at once and the room is now warm and friendly. Instead of staying in there alone, he wanders all over the house and garden and seems delighted to be noticed. The children see him too, but they are not in the least worried by him. After meeting you, they both told me that they had always known he was there, but didn't like to mention him in case I was frightened by the coffin. Considering that when I was a child I never dared to mention ghosts to the grown-ups, it was idiotic of me not to realize that my children see them too. You don't mind him still being with you? I inquired rather anxiously. Of course we don't. She sounded quite indignant. He is happy with us. He needs to be among people he can love before he will be ready to move on. He is most welcome. The only people he alarms are occasional visitors who are scared when the children talk to him and when they see our Labrador playing with an invisible dog. So I finish this here, and there will be a third reading before we get on to chapter 10, which is again by Dennis.